They say a $250 million mistake usually makes a loud noise, a gunshot, a scream, a stock market crash. But in the hushed velvet corners of the glass ledger in Manhattan, the end of an empire sounded like nothing more than a silver spoon clinking against a porcelain saucer. Leopoldo Ferrantini, the most honorable titan in global tech finance, was 3 seconds away from signing a merger that would have vaporized his legacy. His elite legal team saw nothing. The world's most advanced AI audits detected zero flaws. But as the waitress leaned in to refill his water, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw a ghost bank trap designed to trigger a catastrophic default. She risked everything to whisper 5 words that stopped his pen mid-air. She wasn't just a server. She was a hunted financial prodigy hiding in plain sight. This is how an exhausted waitress with a tragic past saved a king, and how a single microscopic watermark ignited the most sophisticated corporate war in history. The humidity of the New York City subway always felt like a weight LOL. Bryce carried home every night, a physical manifestation of the secrets she kept buried. To the world, she was just LOL, the quiet, efficient waitress at the city's most exclusive corporate haunt. She was the girl who remembered that you liked your espresso at exactly 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and that you preferred your sparkling water without a lime. She was invisible, and for 8 years, invisibility had been her only sanctuary. But behind those tired, hazel eyes was a mind that functioned like a high-frequency trading algorithm. While other children were reading Dr. Seuss, Ella was sitting on her father's lap in their sun-drenched study in Greenwich, learning to read the heartbeat of a balance sheet. Her father, Giacomo Bryce, hadn't been a typical accountant. He was a financial forensic artist, the man the good guys called when the bad guys hid money in the shadows of the digital world. "Numbers don't lie, Lolita," he would whisper, his voice thick with the weary pride of a man who knew too much. "Men lie. Systems lie. But the math? The math is the only truth we have left." Then came the Ghost Syndicate, a group of predatory corporate raiders who didn't use bullets but bankruptcy. They didn't want Giacomo's silence. They wanted his genius to help them bleed the world dry. When he refused, they didn't just kill him. They dismantled his reputation, branded him a fraud, and left Elol with nothing but a mountain of debt and a target on her back. She had watched her father wither under the weight of a shame he didn't earn, dying of a broken heart just weeks before the accidental fire took their home. Since then, Elol had been running. She scrubbed her digital footprint, changed her last name, and traded her spreadsheets for serving trays. She made herself small. She made herself forget. Until tonight. The glass ledger was quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists where billions of dollars are being discussed. At the corner booth, the one with the tactical view of the entire floor, sat Leopoldo Ferrantini. Leopoldo wasn't like the other vultures Lowell served. He was a builder, not a destroyer. He was known for his ethical tech initiatives and his refusal to engage in the predatory lending that had ruined families like hers. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of his thousands of employees, and eyes that held a piercing, lonely intelligence. Across from him sat Matteo, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, the kind of man Elol's father had warned her about. They were finalizing a $250 million merger with a Swiss-based fintech firm. The documents were laid out on the mahogany table like a roadmap to a digital gold mine. As Lo approached with a tray of decaf coffee, her eyes involuntarily darted to the top page of the merger agreement. It was a reflex she couldn't suppress, a ghost of her father's training rising within her. Wait. She slowed her pace, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. The logo on the header of the Swiss firm. The font was a bespoke serif alpha, rare, expensive. But the kerning, the space between the V and the Y, was off by less than a millimeter. In the world of elite finance, that wasn't a typo. It was a signature. It was the watermark of the Ghost Syndicate. Her breath hitched. If Leopoldo signed that document, a hidden vampire clause in the digital escrow would trigger. Within 60 seconds of the signature, $250 million would be routed through a series of ghost banks, leaving Leopoldo's firm legally liable for a debt that didn't exist, effectively bankrupting his charitable foundations and handing his tech patents to the syndicate. She looked at Leopoldo. He looked exhausted, his hand hovering over the signature line with a Mont Blanc pen. He was a good man about to be walked off a cliff by his own associates. Elul felt the familiar cold sweat of fear. If she spoke, her cover was blown. The syndicate would know a Barais was still alive. They would come for her. She should just pour the coffee and walk away. She should stay invisible. But she saw her father's face in the flickering candlelight of the restaurant. She saw the way he had been destroyed because he stood alone. She leaned in, her hand trembling slightly as she set the cup down. She didn't look at Matteo. She looked directly into Leopoldo's startled, dark eyes. "The routing transit is inverted," she whispered, her voice a low, melodic tremor. Leopoldo paused, his brow furrowing. "Excuse me?" Matteo snapped his head up, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Get lost, sweetheart. We're in the middle of a closing." Elul didn't flinch. She kept her gaze locked on Leopoldo, the man who represented the last shred of honor in an industry of thieves. The Series B escrow clause on page 14. It references a Lugano clearinghouse that was delisted 4 hours ago for a technical liquidity shift. If you sign, the $250 million doesn't go to the merger. It goes to a ghost trap. Check the kerning on the header. It's a counterfeit. The silence that followed was suffocating. Matteo's face went from indignant to a sickly pale gray. Leopoldo didn't shout. He didn't call security. He simply put his pen down and looked at the document, then back at the girl in the stained apron. He saw the way she was standing, not like a waitress, but like a master strategist who had just checkmated a king. "Who are you?" Leopoldo asked, his voice a mix of wonder and intense curiosity. "Just the help, Mr. Florentini," Lowell said, her pulse thundering in her ears as she realized the door to her quiet life had just slammed shut. "But if I were you, I'd check the biometric trail on that escrow. Someone in this room wants you to disappear." Leopoldo stood up, his height imposing, his presence filling the room. He looked at Matteo, who was already reaching for his phone with shaking hands, then back at LOL. "You're not just the help," Leopoldo said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate frequency that made Elol's skin tingle. "You're the person who just saved my life. And I suspect you're the person I've been looking for my entire career." He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of her tray. A silent acknowledgement of the bridge she had just crossed. "Don't go anywhere, Elol," he commanded softly. "The shift is over. We have a lot to talk about." As the high-heeled elite of New York watched in confusion, the most powerful man in the room walked a waitress toward the back office, leaving a $250 million lie dying on the table. Elol knew her life of hiding was over, but for the first time in 8 years, as she looked at Leopoldo's protective stance, she didn't feel like running. She felt like fighting back. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. With those who believe that destiny can change everything one day. Subscribe, because when destiny shifts, everything changes. The transition from the clatter of porcelain to the hum of high-end servers was a blur of adrenaline and disbelief. Within 48 hours, LOL found herself standing in a glass-walled office 60 stories above Manhattan, the nerve center of Florentini Global. She was no longer wearing a coffee-stained apron. She wore a sharp charcoal gray suit that felt like armor. Yet the weight in her chest remained. Every time she looked at a monitor, she saw her father's reflection in the dark glass. Leopoldo didn't treat her like a curiosity or a lucky amateur. He treated her like an equal. He had cleared his schedule, moved her into his inner sanctum, and given her a single directive: find them. "You're staring at the ledger again," Leopoldo said, his voice cutting through her trance. He walked toward her, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. He didn't offer wine. He knew she needed her mind sharp. "I'm looking for the heartbeat, Leopoldo," Lowell replied, her fingers dancing across a holographic display. "The Ghost Syndicate doesn't leave fingerprints, but they leave rhythms. They move money in a way that mimics natural market volatility, like a predator blending into the tall grass." Leopoldo stood beside her, his presence a grounding force. Over the last few days, their relationship had shifted from savior and survivor to something more profound. They spent 18 hours a day together, fueled by caffeine and a shared, silent understanding of loss. Leopoldo had opened up to her about his own isolation, how being the honorable billionaire meant having a target on his back from both the criminals and the corrupt regulators. My father used to say that the most dangerous men are the ones who sign checks instead of triggers, Alol whispered, her eyes softening as she looked at a photo of Giacomo she had hidden in her phone. He tried to warn the world. They silenced him because he was alone. I won't let that happen to you. Leopoldo reached out, his hand hovering near hers, a rare moment of vulnerability. You're not alone anymore, Elo. We're building something here. A fortress of truth. But the fortress had a crack. Elo spent the next 3 nights diving into the digital archives of the $250 million merger attempt. She wasn't just looking at the fake bank. She was looking at how the deal had reached Leopoldo's desk in the first place. A merger of that magnitude required internal vetting, a series of green lights from the most trusted members of his circle. She found the anomaly at 3:14. It wasn't a stolen password or a hacked account. It was an authorization memo, one that had bypassed the standard security protocols using a family override code. There were only 3 people in the world with that code. Leopoldo, his aging mother, and his cousin Matteo. Elo felt a cold shiver. Matteo wasn't just a rude executive she had seen at the restaurant. He was the bridge. He was the one who had invited the ghost syndicate into the house. Leopoldo, she called out, her voice echoing in the empty moonlit office. He emerged from the lounge. Looking as exhausted as she felt, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. What did you find? She pointed to the screen showing the trail of the family override. The trap wasn't just set for your money. It was set for your seat. Matteo wasn't just helping them steal $250 million. He was clearing the way for a hostile takeover. Once you defaulted on that debt, the syndicate would have used the moral turpitude clause in your contract to strip you of your voting rights. Matteo would have been the new CEO by Monday morning. Leopoldo stared at the name on the screen, the man he had grown up with, the man he had protected. The betrayal wasn't just corporate. It was visceral. His jaw tightened, a muscle leaping in his cheek. He was my brother in everything but blood, Leopoldo said. His voice a low, dangerous rumble. The syndicate preys on that, Alol said, standing up and walking to him. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but firm. They find the person with the most to gain and the least to lose. They promised him a throne built on your ruins. Leopoldo looked down at her, the anger in his eyes softening into something else, a deep, searing respect. And what did they promise you, Elo? When they destroyed your father, what did they take? Everything, she said, her voice cracking for the first time. They took my name. They took my safety. They took the only person who ever saw me for who I really was. In the silence of the skyscraper, the distance between them vanished. Leopoldo reached out, cupping her face with his hand. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, a gesture so tender it made Elol's breath hitch. I see you, he whispered. I see the genius, the courage, and the girl who's tired of running. You're not a waitress, and you're not just a strategist. You're the heart of this fight. Elo leaned into his palm, a single tear escaping. For the first time in 8 years, the exhaustion of hiding started to lift. She wasn't just a ghost anymore. She was the architect of the counterattack. Matteo thinks he's won, Elo said, her eyes flashing with a new, cold fire. He thinks he's playing a game of chess. But he doesn't realize his opponent isn't you anymore. It's me. And I've been studying this board since I was 7 years old. Leopoldo nodded, his hand sliding down to grip hers. Then let's show him what happens when you try to burn down a house with a Barice inside. Together, they turned back to the screens. The hunt for the Ghost Syndicate had officially begun, but the dynamic had changed. It was no longer just about survival. It was about a burgeoning love forged in the fires of corporate warfare. Matteo was the traitor, but he was also the key. LOL began drafting a digital honeypot. Lure so tempting that a greedy man like Matteo wouldn't be able to resist. She was going to lead the Ghost Syndicate right into the light. And Leopoldo was going to make sure they never saw the darkness coming. The next phase required precision. LOL identified the Syndicate's primary communication hub, an encrypted server hidden behind a legitimate charity front. To get the access she needed, they wouldn't use force. They would use the one thing the elite couldn't resist, an invitation. The Global Financial Gala is in 2 days, Leopoldo noted, looking at the invitation on his desk. Every major player will be there. including the men behind the syndicate. Then that's where we strike, Alol said. But I won't be there as your strategist. I'll be there as your greatest acquisition. Let them think I'm just a trophy. Let them be comfortable. A comfortable man is a careless man. Leopoldo looked at her, a smirk playing on his lips, a rare, genuine smile. I don't think anyone could ever mistake you for a trophy, Alol. But if you want to play the part, I'll buy the dress. Make it black, Alol said, her mind already moving 10 steps ahead. Black for a funeral. Because by the end of that night, the Ghost Syndicate is going to start dying. The emotional stakes were set. Alol was no longer hiding. She was stepping onto the world stage, armed with the genius of her father and the protection of the man she was starting to love. The war was no longer just about money, it was about legacy, justice, and the heart of the woman who saw everything. The Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom was a cathedral of excess, dripping in gold leaf and the suffocating scent of expensive lily. This was the hunting ground of the world's elite, place where fortunes were traded over appetizers and lives were ruined between sips of vintage crystal. For Ella, walking into this room wasn't just a mission. It was a ghost story. This was the world that had swallowed her father whole, and tonight, she was walking right back into its jaws. She wore a gown of midnight black silk that clung to her like a second skin, a sharp contrast to the diamonds Leopoldo had insisted she wear. But the most powerful thing she carried wasn't around her neck. It was the silent, razor-sharp focus behind her eyes. Leopoldo stood beside her, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back. His presence was a shield, but as they moved through the crowd of nodding ambassadors and shark-like CEOs, his touch felt like something more. It was a tether. Breathe, he whispered, leaning close so his breath warmed her ear. You look like a queen, but you move like a soldier. Relax your shoulders. Let them think you're just the woman on my arm. I'm trying, Lowell murmured, her eyes scanning the room with the precision of a predator. But I can hear the math in this room, Leopoldo. I can hear the lies humming in the air. The plan was delicate. While Leopoldo distracted the board members, Ella was to navigate the Romance Circle, a group of ultra-private Swiss bankers who specialized in the syndicate's preferred method of shadow lending. They spoke Romance, an ancient, rare dialect, believing it to be a perfect, unhackable encryption in a room full of English and Italian speakers. They didn't know that Giacomo Barrais had spent 3 years in the Swiss Alps deconstructing that very language for the Vatican. To LOL, their secret conversation was as clear as a bell. She drifted away from Leopoldo, playing the role of the bored, beautiful companion. She stood near a marble pillar, sipping a glass of water, her head tilted just enough to catch the conversation of 3 men in charcoal suits standing by the terrace. The Fiorentini trap failed because of a girl, one whispered in the guttural, rhythmic tones of Romance. Matteo is panicking. He says Leopoldo has found a new oracle. We need to move the $250 million now, before the audit trail hardens. Matteo is a fool, the older one replied, his voice cold. Tell him to trigger the emergency transfer to the Seychelles hub tonight. Once the money hits the ghost vault, it won't matter what Leopoldo knows. By sunrise, Fiorentini Global will be a hollow shell, and we will move on to the Costa family in Naples. Ello's hand tightened on her glass. It wasn't just Leopoldo. The syndicate was a virus, systematically infecting and draining the pillars of the global economy. If she didn't stop them tonight, dozens of other families, thousands of other employees, would face the same ruin her father had. She caught Leopoldo's eye across the room. She gave a sharp, microscopic nod. The game had shifted from a hunt to a race dot as she moved to reunite with him. A hand gripped her upper arm. Not Leopoldo's firm, protective hand, but a frantic, sweating grip. She turned to find Matteo. His tuxedo was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot with the desperation of a man who knew the noose was tightening. You, he hissed, pulling her toward a shadowed alcove. I don't know who you are or where Leo found you, but you're playing with fire. You think he cares about you? You're just a tool to him. A way to save his billions. Ello looked at his hand on her arm, her expression one of icy disdain. Release me, Matteo, before I decide to tell Leopoldo exactly how much you've been skimming from the charity foundations, too. Matteo flinched as if she'd slapped him. I'm not the one who should be afraid. The people I work for. They don't lose. If you don't walk away now, you'll end up just like that whistleblower in Rome. What was his name? Bryce? They found him with a pen in his hand and a hole in his legacy. The world seemed to tilt. The mention of her father's name in Matteo's mouth felt like a physical violation. The grief she had spent 8 years suppressing surged up, a tidal wave of raw, jagged pain. But underneath the pain, there was a new, terrifying clarity. My father's name was Giacomo, Alol said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more power than a scream. And he didn't die because he was weak. He died because he was the only man brave enough to look at monsters like you and say, no, you're not a titan, Matteo. You're a parasite. And parasites die when they run out of blood. She wrenched her arm away just as Leopoldo appeared, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't have to say a word. He stepped between Alol and Matteo, his physical presence so intimidating that Matteo backed away, nearly tripping over a waiter. Get out, Leopoldo commanded, his voice vibrating with a lethal quietness. Before I stop being a man of honor and start being the man my ancestors were. Matteo fled into the crowd, but as he went, he pulled a small black device from his pocket. A remote trigger. He's doing it, Lowell gasped, grabbing Leopoldo's hand. Her anger was gone, replaced by a frantic urgency. He's triggering the transfer prematurely. He's running, Leopoldo. He's going to drain the accounts and vanish. How much time? Leopoldo asked, already signaling his security detail. The Romansh banker said the hub is in the city, Alol said, her mind racing through the digital maps she had memorized. The physical servers for the Ventura front are in a data center in Midtown. If they're moving the money now, we have less than an hour before the encryption locks us out forever. Leopoldo grabbed his coat, his eyes locked on hers. Then we don't have time for a car. We have a helicopter on the roof. As they ran toward the elevators, Elo felt the stakes pressing down on her. This was the climax her father had never reached. This was the moment where the numbers either became a cage or a key. LOL, Leopoldo said as they stepped into the elevator, the doors closing on the gilded world of the gala. He took her face in both hands, his eyes searching hers. If we do this, there's no going back. You won't be invisible anymore. The whole world will know who you are. Ella looked at the man who had become her partner, her protector, and her heart. She thought of the waitress she had been, hiding in the steam of a kitchen, and the woman she was now, standing in the center of a storm. Good, she said, a fierce, tearful smile breaking across her face. It's time they learn the name Bryce again. The elevator surged upward, toward the roof, toward the servers, and toward the final battle for her father's soul and her own future. The Ghost Syndicate thought they were untraceable, but they were about to find out that some ghosts have a way of coming back for what's theirs. The helicopter ride to the Midtown data center was a blur of neon lights and the rhythmic thrum of rotors. Below them, New York looked like a circuit board, a vast network of data and lives that Lowell was now fighting to protect. Leopoldo sat across from her, his hand gripping her so tightly she could feel the steady, reassuring beat of his pulse. They didn't need words. The shared silence was a vow. They touched down on a rain-slicked helipad and moved like a single shadow into the glass and steel monolith of the Ventura Tech Operations Center. It was a cathedral of cold air and blinking blue lights, a place built for a bank that didn't exist. 30 minutes, Alol whispered, her breath hitching as she sat at the central terminal. The transfer is in the fragmentation phase. If I don't stop it now, the $250 million becomes digital dust scattered across 4 continents. Leopoldo stood behind her, a wall of strength as his security team secured the perimeter. Do what you were born to do, LOL. I'm right here. Her fingers flew across the keys, the familiar language of code flowing through her like a symphony. She bypassed the first 3 layers of the Ghost Syndicate's firewalls, but then she hit a wall. A biometric lockout. The system demanded the physical thumbprint of an authorized signatory to reverse a Category A transfer. It's Matteo, Alol said, her voice tight. He's the only one who can unlock the kill switch. At that moment, the heavy security doors hissed open. 2 of Leopoldo's men marched a disheveled, trembling Matteo into the room. He wasn't the arrogant executive anymore. He was a man who had realized he'd brought a knife to a nuclear strike. I won't do it, Mateo whimpered, looking at the screens. They'll kill me. The syndicate. They don't forgive failure. Leopoldo stepped forward, his shadow looming over his cousin. He didn't raise his hand, but his voice had the weight of an executioner's blade. Mateo, you have two choices. You can provide that thumbprint and face a very long, very quiet life in a legal facility under my protection. Or you can walk out of this building right now with nothing, no money, no name, and no shield when the syndicate realizes you lost their ghost vault. Mateo looked at Leopoldo's cold, unwavering eyes and saw the truth. He reached out a shaking hand and pressed his thumb to the scanner. I'm in, lull-breathed. But as she reached the transfer queue, she saw something more. Behind the $250 million transfer was a hidden subdirectory, the master ledger. It was the holy grail her father had died seeking. It contained the routing numbers for every cent the Ghost Syndicate had ever stolen. Over $2 billion euros gathered from families, charities, and pension funds across Europe. Leopoldo. Look, she gasped, her eyes wide. It's all here. Not just your money. All of it. Can you take it? Leopoldo asked, his voice low with awe. I can do better, Lowell said, a fierce, brilliant light shining in her eyes. I'm not just going to take it. I'm going to redirect it. For the next 15 minutes, Lowell performed a digital miracle. She didn't route the money back to the victims that would take years of legal battles. Instead, she used Leopoldo's CEO emergency override to legally gift the entire $2 billion into the newly formed Bryce Ferrantini Foundation. By the time the syndicate's servers flagged the intrusion, the money was no longer stolen. It was legally protected philanthropic capital, earmarked for the protection of whistleblowers and the victims of corporate fraud. With one final keystroke, she hit enter. The screens turned a calm, steady green. The $250 million was back in Leopoldo's accounts. The $2 billion was safe. The Ghost Syndicate was, for the first time in its history, completely bankrupt. Elo leaned back, her hands finally trembling. The silence in the server room was profound. It was over. 1 month later, the world was a different place. The news of the Bryce Ferrantini gift had dominated the headlines, shattering the syndicate's anonymity and leading to dozens of high-profile arrests. LOL stood on the balcony of Leopoldo's estate in the Hudson Valley, watching the sunset paint the river in shades of gold and violet. She was no longer a waitress. She was the most respected financial strategist in the country, but more importantly, her father's name had been cleared. Giacomo Bryce was now hailed as a hero. His accidental death reopened as a high-stakes murder investigation. She heard a footstep behind her and didn't have to turn to know it was him. Leopoldo stepped beside her, looking not at the view, but at her. The foundation opened its first headquarters today, he said softly. In your father's old building in Greenwich. We're calling it the Bryce Center for Financial Justice. LOL felt a lump in her throat. He would have loved that. Thank you, Leopoldo. For everything. I didn't do it for him, LOL. Leopoldo said. He took her hands in his expression more sincere and raw than she had ever seen. I spent my life building walls to protect an empire that felt empty. Then you walked in with a tray of coffee and showed me that the only thing worth building is a life with someone who sees the world as clearly as you do. He dropped to one knee, the dying sunlight catching the brilliance of the diamond in his hand, not a cold corporate stone, but a symbol of the fire they had walked through together. LOL Bryce, you saved my legacy. Now I'm asking you to share it. Not as my strategist, but as my wife. Will you build a new world with me? Tears of pure, unadulterated joy finally spilled over. LOL didn't think about the math. She didn't look for a flaw. For the first time in her life, she trusted the feeling in her heart completely. Yes, she whispered, pulling him up to her. Yes, Leopoldo. As they kissed under the vast open sky, the exhausted waitress and the lonely billionaire disappeared. In their place stood two people who had turned a corporate nightmare into a modern fairy tale. The ghosts were gone. The light had finally won. What an incredible journey of justice and love. From the shadows of a diner to the heights of a global foundation, LOL and Leopoldo proved that brilliance and honor are the ultimate power couple. If this story moved you as much as it did us, hit that like button and subscribe to Destiny Shift for more deep burn dramas. Do you think LL's father was watching from somewhere? And what would you do with $2 billion to change the world? Let us know in the comments below. We'll see you in the next shift. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments with those who believe that destiny can change everything one day. Subscribe, because when destiny shifts, everything changes.